Hello, party people. Can I hear some noise? Today, we are talking about probiotics on the IBS Freedom Podcast, and I am pumped. Last week, we talked about prebiotics. So last week, we talked about feeding the good bugs, and now we're going to talk about supplementing with additional good bugs. So this is going to be available in food or capsules, and we're going to talk about that as it relates to IBS, SIBO, and gut health overall. So Amy, care to give us the first kind of words of wisdom to build this framework around? Totally putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I would say the first thing I want to preface this by, because I do really like probiotics, and I think they can be really useful in a number of different ways. But I will say, I want to preface this discussion that they're not necessarily cure-alls. I think sometimes people are like, oh, I just need to find the right probiotic and everything will be better. And that's with a lot of different stuff in the gut health space, not just probiotics. But I think prefacing the conversation with probiotics can certainly be useful in combination with other factors. I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes people think, I can totally balance out my gut by just taking this probiotic and not changing anything else. Yeah. And again, maybe it helps a little bit, but it's not going to carry all the weight for you. But I think probiotics also tend to be controversial, especially in the SIBO space, which...
Oh, we're going to get to that, my dear. We're going to get there. Hang on to your hats, SIBO people.
Yes, I think they're less controversial in the IBS space in general. So, even
I would say they're popular in the IBS space, truthfully.
Right. But there's a lot of fear around the SIBO scenario when it comes to probiotics that
absolutely
I don't think's well founded, but we'll certainly jump into that.
I get the fear, I get the apprehension, but we're going to have more of a fleshed out conversation around this, because I do think right now, well, let's start with this actually. Let's just get right into it. But I want to preface what I'm about to say with something else too. Two other things that I want to make a point of with probiotics as a general rule of thumb, a general kind of starting point, and then we're going to get into the probiotic SIBO conversation. Number one, like you said, they're not going to be cure-all. They could be profoundly helpful, but they're probably not going to carry the weight of the world on this one probiotic or this one yogurt or whatever it might be. So just have kind of reasonable expectations for any of the herbs or supplements or strategies that you're implementing. It's usually not going to be one thing that's going to cure you of IBS. It's going to be several things all put together in the right sequence and really getting to the root causes. I think it's also important to know that we have a lot of different probiotics, right? We've got lactobacilli, bifidobacterium, bacillus strains. There's a new Akkermansia product on the market. There's some Clostridium species on the market. But we don't have probiotics for every single good bacteria. So, right now, as of 2021, we do not have a Faecalibacterium prausnitzii probiotic. They're working on it. They're trying to make one, but as of right now, we simply do not have that available in any capacity whatsoever. Up until very recently, Akkermansia muciniphila was not available in a probiotic, but now there's a new product that I think is either on the market or it's very close to being on the market now. So, it's we get kind of lost in the weeds of this conversation of re-inoculating or replacing the good bacteria with probiotics. And you could do that to an extent, but you can't do that with all of the good bacteria. There's numerous thousands of good bacteria in the gut, many of which we probably haven't even named yet. And we simply do not have a probiotic product to replace all of those good bacteria. And that kind of segues back into the conversation around FMT, fecal microbial transplant, where there's just some stuff that you cannot get in a yogurt or a pill or a kombucha right now. And that's why there are people doing FMT, because the only way to introduce some of these good bacteria is to acquire it from a fecal donor, from a healthy host. So I think that's part of the limitation of probiotics, is that we simply don't have a probiotic for every type of bacteria that can confer a health benefit. And it's very specific too. That's another thing I want to point out, is that we really have to get quite specific and quite granular when we talk about probiotics, because you could have the same exact species. Like you could have Lactobacillus acidophilus LA14, and you could have Lactobacillus acidophilus NCMF or FM, whatever it is, and they could do different things. Even though they're both Lactobacillus acidophilus, it's kind of like when you talk about the species of a probiotic, like Lactobacillus acidophilus or Bifidobacteria longum, that's a species name. It's like the equivalent of saying Homo sapiens like pizza. It's like, okay. Like you can make some generalizations about Homo sapiens, sure. But damn well there's going to be those weirdos out there who don't like pizza, or there's going to be the weirdos who don't like chocolate, or the weirdos like me who don't like coffee. Like you can make some generalizations across species and across genuses like Lactobacilli. But if you want the best quality evidence and the best quality conversation and recommendations, you have to get really granular and you have to talk about the specific strain. And I think that's part of the hindrance with the probiotic world right now, is right now we have this kind of crapshoot system where it's like one research group is researching this one probiotic and another research group might research a totally different probiotic for the exact same diagnosis, and then come to wildly different conclusions because they do different things.
Right.
It's like you're trying to compare metformin to Paxil. Like, you can't do that. They're totally different. But then sometimes you get these weird conclusions from like meta-analyses that say, yeah, probiotics don't work for rheumatoid arthritis or whatever it might be. And it's like, well, yeah, the results are mixed because everybody is researching a different type of probiotic.
Right.
And
right.
we can't generalize across probiotics as a whole. So it kills me because I think I shared last week, I don't remember if it was in a private conversation or the podcast, but my husband had some health issues come up very recently, and he was having some abdominal discomfort and gas. And his new primary care doctor, who I otherwise really liked, she was very, very nice. And she said, and I'm nearly quoting, she said, well, you could try some Gas X. And if that doesn't work, you could try a probiotic. They don't have really good evidence. Like, there really isn't a lot of evidence for probiotics, but for the people that they work for, they work really well. And if that doesn't work, we can get you on a PPI. And it's just a really good thing that I was wearing a mask in that appointment, because underneath the KN95 mask, I was like, just whistling up my face, because I was like, oh, bless your heart, you don't know. Like, you don't know anything about probiotics. I give her credit for even saying that he could try probiotics. Like, that was good.
Right.
But when she said, yeah, they don't really have any evidence, or they have very, very poor quality evidence. And I was like, yeah, because it's kind of a complicated conversation to have.
Yeah. Well,
and then you can try PPI. Yeah, sure, lady. Yeah, just try VSL number 3. And if that doesn't work, whatever.
That's
just
the next
get out of PPI.
jump. That's the next jump.
Good Lord. And he doesn't have a lick of heartburn. Keep that in mind, too. His primary symptom is bloating and mild abdominal discomfort. And she's like, yeah, we'll get you started on a PPI. And I'm rolling my eyes so far back into my skull that they're going to touch my brain at the rate I'm going. And I'm just like, no, just restrain yourself, get through the appointment. You'll talk some sense into him afterwards. And I basically just looked at my husband and was like, we are never putting you on a PPI. Mark my words.
Right.
Like, no.
That's where you draw the line. So a couple things you said that I think are really important to emphasize. One thing you mentioned is that we just don't know everything about the microbiome, which I think is so key. Like, we don't know what every bug does. We haven't isolated all the good bugs. We haven't isolated all the bad bugs. So there is limitations in terms of what we know from a probiotic standpoint. Another thing that you mentioned that I want to maybe expand on is that, you know, from a probiotic standpoint, most probiotics are transient as well. So like sometimes people are like, oh, I'm going to recolonize my gut.
I'm going to reinoculate the 4 R's or the 5 R's.
Right. I'm going to reinoculate everything. And like, I'm going to put bifido in because I'm low in bifido. And these things can have some great effects to the gut environment.
Totally.
You know, they're going to affect the gut in positive ways, or they can. I mean, theoretically, if the strain's appropriate for you and that you do really well with it, it can do some great things to change the gut environment, which could potentially help increase some of your own good microbes in the gut by adjusting the environment. But this idea that you can reinoculate or replace your bugs is really a faulty assumption. And usually, again, they're transient. The probiotics you eat and take in internally, whether they're food-based or supplementally, are going to be more transient than sticking around and recolonizing anything that's missing is not is not the right assumption.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point to note. And that's part of why the absolute number one thing you can do is work on nutrition and things like prebiotics and resistant starch and eating the FODMAPs and eating all these fruits and vegetables, because you're going to feed the resident good bugs. And that's your long-term ticket. Unless you want to take a probiotic for the rest of your life, in which case be my guest. And I will say, like, I say that sarcastically. I've said this before. I am in the club of having had a metric ton of antibiotics in my life. Like, I was the chronic ear infection kid. Then I was the chronic sinusitis adult. I had Lyme disease that required IV antibiotics for 6 weeks. I have nuked my microbiome for the first 2.5 decades of my life. And so when I do stool testing, I am consistently low on bifidobacterium. I'm usually moderately low on lactobacillus. My Akkermansia is so-so. Like, I know that I need to nurture some of those guys. And frankly, some of my butyrate producers are just gone. Luckily, I have a lot of Faecalibacterium to make up for it. But some of those, like, I forget, Butyrococcus, or I forget which species now, but some of the species are just gone entirely. Right. And I'm not surprised. But the thing for me is that I would rather try to feed the existing microbes and take a probiotic than try to rely on a probiotic by itself, because I know that the probiotic is transient. But for me, knowing my numbers and knowing how far I can get through food, I know that I probably do need to just take a probiotic for the rest of my life, period. Because the reality is I nuked my microbiome for the first 2.5 decades of my life. I can't go back and undo that. And shy of getting FMT, the next best thing for me is going to be to take a probiotic indefinitely for the rest of my life. So personally, for me, I choose to do both.
Right. Yeah, and I do think the way I sort of look at it from a probiotic, prebiotic standpoint, this is something I'll discuss with my clients a lot, is that, you know, a probiotic generally is going to help create better soil. So it creates like a better environment for your good bugs to thrive and a better environment for your gut to function, just in general. So you're creating better soil, but the prebiotics are actually like the sun and the water and like the things that really can accelerate gut repair from a microbiome standpoint. So it really takes both. And again, I'm glad we were able to talk about the prebiotics last session or last podcast, because I find that it doesn't get as much airtime, and you need both to really build a resilient and diverse gut. So I think that's dead on. And I would say too, just like from a history standpoint, I mean, I think like now our modern world, we're like much less exposed to probiotics from our food sources. We've had a lot of antibiotics, which again, like antibiotics aren't inherently bad, but like they're good in a lot of ways. They protect.
I was
us
happy
from
to have them
infection.
when I had Lyme disease. That's for damn sure.
Right.
You know?
So like these things aren't bad, but like, you know, I think there's been some overuse of antibiotics that have left our guts more depleted, and I think our lifestyle and food has left us less exposed to different probiotics and things like that. So I do think there can be, like, from a historical perspective, less exposure to probiotics from an environmental standpoint and also from a food standpoint. I think, again, we used to eat foods that were a bit dirty.
Yeah.
And, you know, you got a little
Pluck
dirt
a
on
carrot
it.
out of the ground and chomp away.
Right. And now everything's, like, heavily washed and cleaned before it's put up for sale at the market. So, you know, I do think that there's definitely a higher need when it comes to being aware of how you're getting some microbes in your either in your diet or supplementally to help provide you with the microbes you need to kind of stimulate the immune system, help to you know, provide you with, again, this better soil from a gut standpoint. So I just wanted to point that out a bit.
I guess you could almost think of it like, here's a new metaphor, fresh out of my brain, so get ready for this one.
Right.
I haven't fleshed it out yet.
I'm ready.
Imagine you walk into a party.
Oh.
And I don't know, like, what would one of the worst case scenarios be? Say you walk into a party and it's nothing but axe murderers. And they're all holding the axes, right? Like, they're clearly axe murderers. And you
Lizzie
walk
Bourdain.
in. I don't know that reference, but sure.
Isn't it Lizzie maybe I'm wrong. I think it's Lizzie Bourdain. She's the one that, like, axe murdered her parents.
Oh, I don't know. I do not watch the news in any way, shape, or form. I don't keep up with anything current, hardly, because the news makes me depressed very easily, and I lose faith in humanity. So that could be a very accurate reference. I would not know.
I'm looking it up. I'm looking it up. Yes. Lizzie Borden, not Bourdain. I'm mixing up.
Close enough.
She axe murdered her father and stepmother in Massachusetts.
Like you do. So imagine you walk into a party with all of her in it.
Right.
And you walk in, you're like,
well,
oh,
what
shit.
if it's just her?
Like, this is going to be a rough party, right? Versus, what if you walked into the party and it's like one or two of those axe murderers, but also there's like, I don't even know. I'm going to date myself and you're going to realize how out of touch I am with current pop culture. But walk in and there's like a bunch of cool people. Like, all right, now there's like Rihanna and Taylor Swift and I don't even know who else to reference because I'm put on the spot. But
we need someone to protect us from Lizzie still.
Yeah. Or at least write a song about it or something, right? So you can kind of imagine the probiotics. It's like if you have dysbiosis and you have a bunch of those axe murderer Lizzie Bourdain people in your party, it's like the probiotics. It's like you're throwing in a bunch of Taylor Swifts into the mix, or I don't know, whoever people are really into these days. You're throwing in a bunch of the good guys to kind of water down and outcompete and crowd out some of those bad guys. And it makes the party just like a more fun place to be. Watch, we're going to get comments down below. They're going to be like, I hate Taylor Swift. She's such a poser. I will have you know, I love Taylor Swift's music. I think she's very talented and a gorgeous human being. And the Netflix special about her is quite interesting. So I will just leave you with that, dear internet viewers. But I am a Taylor Swift fan, so vicious comments will be deleted. But anyway.
Nice.
I'm
impartial.
You get the idea. I rather like her. But anyway, I don't know if that actually added anything to the conversation, but it popped in my brain, the party analogy nonetheless. And all I could go with is the axe murdering psychopath party for whatever reason.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I think, the probiotics create that better environment. They're crowding out some of the bad guys, and they're just taking up some space, and they're kind of doing nice things at the party and making it a much nicer party to be at. It's not that they're going to stick around. Like, if you invite Taylor Swift to your party, is she going to stay at your house forever? No. She's going to have to leave and go do a concert or whatever. I'm sticking with this analogy. But she'll at least pop in for a while and make the party a really chill place. And if you keep taking the Taylor Swift probiotics, she'll stick around indefinitely. But, like, the probiotics are only going to stick around for as long as you're taking the probiotics, and then you will eventually poop them out.
Well, and I think
Tay-Tay's got things to do.
To expand on your analogy too, like,
yes,
maybe the probiotics give a little bit more protection as well. So probiotics can kind of help with mucosal support at times. I mean, certain ones can. They can help with IgA levels.
Yeah, like they bring chips to the party.
Right, so they could bring, like, maybe something to protect you against the crazy Lizzie Borden lady that's at the party. So maybe you have, like, a gun or something. I don't know. We're getting
a force field.
Yeah, a force field. Something to keep the crazy lady with the axe contained.
I wonder if any of our listeners are artistic at all. Like, I wonder if anybody could draw us, like, the world's worst meme that only our listeners will understand.
Right.
If anybody's artistic, draw us a picture of, like, Taylor Swift making a force field around us at a party full of Lizzie Borden axe-murderer psychopaths and a bowl of nachos. Please draw us that, and we'll post that all over our Instagram if you draw that for us. But I'm artistic in the sense of, like, I can do stuff like this, like my paintings. I'm not digitally artistic. I can barely make anything in Microsoft Paint, so I can't produce that myself. But if anybody is so inclined, we would love the fan art. Oh, that would be our first fan art, Amy.
Oh my god!
I would feel like we really made it if we had fan art. As a side note, that would be pretty precious.
You know what? Fan art, like, if you kind of combine it, it's fart.
Perfect for the IBS Freedom Podcast.
I know.
Look at that. All right, where were we? What probiotics? I don't even know anymore. So I think probiotics. Let's recap some good takeaways for the beginning of the pod. They are transient. You're going to poop them out as soon as you stop taking them. So they only are going to stick around for as long as you're taking them. No, you're not really re-inoculating. Not truly, at least. That being said, they can be very, very useful. And they can help educate and train your immune system. They can help patch up leaky gut. Some of them are prokinetic in nature and can help modulate motility. Like, probiotics are pretty badass. It's just that, again, the strains really matter. So if you get some rando probiotic, and here's a pet peeve of mine too. Some companies don't tell you what strains they're using, and it drives me absolutely batshit crazy. Because how are you supposed to make an informed decision without that information? And, like, so some companies like Metagenics and Jarrow, Zymogen, like, some of them do disclose the strains, which is great. Other companies like Claire and Apex Energetics, they don't tell you the strains. I don't think Apex does. I forget now. But it's really hard to make that choice if you don't know what you're really buying. And I loved, Jason Hawrelak, the probiotic advisor guy. I loved it when he was talking about this at one point. He said, if a company does not disclose the strains, they probably are using the cheapo strains that don't have any good quality human research, because the companies that use the good ones, I'll put that in air quotes, because we don't know if they're really the best, but the companies that are using the products with human research and good quality evidence, they're generally going to pay more to get those good strains, and they want to brag about it, and they want to use it as a selling point that they have the good strains. So generally speaking, I would be suspicious of a company that does not label their strains. That being said, they could still be helpful, just because, and this is another thing with science, just because we don't have a paper demonstrating efficacy yet doesn't mean it's not effective.
Right.
Right? Like, science is not done yet. We haven't done all the research yet on everything. So 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 years from now, somebody might do a research study on fatty liver disease and Lactobacillus acidophilus LA14. And we might find out then that it's amazing for fatty liver disease. But until that research is done, we simply do not know. So it's not to say that probiotics that are unlabeled, like the strains are unlabeled. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're crap. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should write those off entirely. It's just that you want to weigh that when you're making the decision of what you're going to be taking and what you're going to be spending money on, because you're going to be less certain that it's going to be appropriate for you. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do want to talk a little bit too. Maybe we can touch on from the standpoint of pros and cons of like food-based probiotics sources versus...
You're a mind reader, because I was thinking about that too.
Girl!
Same wavelength!
Yes. Cosmic, what is it?
Cosmic litter mates.
Yeah, cosmic litter mates. Sorry,
yeah.
Words are not coming out right today.
It's okay. We're not doing a podcast or anything.
Right. Yes. But yeah, I think we need to talk maybe a little bit about the food versus probiotic. And like for me, I would say, you know, I like fermented foods. Like if people are tolerating fermented foods, you know, I would encourage them to eat ferments. I would say too, though, like sometimes people might need a little bit more of a controlled experiment from a probiotic standpoint. They might need to limit the amount of strains that they're receiving. Like you can do a little bit more of a controlled experiment when you're using a probiotic supplement compared to ferments. And I would say that's probably the biggest difference and the biggest consideration is if you're someone that's more sensitive and maybe you have histamine issues, ferments might not be the best option. Maybe try probiotic, like a probiotic
like
strain
a capsule.
That you can control a little bit more than like wild ferments or, you know.
Absolutely.
Is that sort of your take on it?
Yep. And yeah, I was going to make that point as well, is that, you know, fermented foods are fantastic, but they're a little bit of a wild card because there's no label on, you know, like I could even go grab it right now. I have some like fermented beets in my fridge here, and I'll like eat a spoon or two with my lunch a couple days a week. And there's, you know, it says that there's live cultures in it, but it doesn't tell you, again, like, you know, Bifidobacterium longum, blah, 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 blah. Like, it doesn't tell you that. It just tells you there's live active cultures. So you don't know if it's all lactobacilli, if there's Bifidobacterium, Streptococcus, Eubacteria. Like, you don't know. You just don't know.
Right.
And that could be a good thing, because chances are the food-based probiotics are probably going to be a more diverse colony, right? Like you can get a probiotic capsule and have it be only one bacteria, and that's all you get. And there's no opportunity for like synergy amongst the different bacteria and synergy with any prebiotics that are in the formula. So on the one hand, like the simple formulas with 1 or 2 or 3 strains, you know what you're getting and you know what you're not getting. You could really isolate and understand individual variables much more clearly. Maybe that's better, but maybe it's also a less diverse colony that you're getting.
Well, and I would add too, like you do get with the ferments as well, like a positive here is that you get what those bacteria make as well. So you get postbiotics. It's kind of a probiotic postbiotic mix. And depending on the food, you could get some prebiotics too. So you could get an assortment of different things that are going to be beneficial to the gut.
Like my beets. The beets themselves have prebiotics, and then they have the lactobacilli or whatever else is in there, and then probably some postbiotics like lactic acid.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, the more I would say the more you really understand your case and your symptoms, and like the more you understand what's going on with your body and your root causes and like what your goals are, the more certain you can be selecting variables and selecting therapeutic options. But if you're in the phase of your journey, or if you have symptoms that are really mysterious and squirrely and like you can't quite put your finger on it, maybe you're one of the people who has like an autoimmune disease that isn't really mainstream yet, and we don't really have a way to test for it yet, but you strongly hypothesize you have autoimmunity, but you really don't know what's going on, or maybe you have like squirrely histamine stuff. I think minimizing the variables and not doing something so big as like a fermented food might be reasonable, at least in the beginning, until you have some general sense of like what's going to be agreeable for your body. But I want to share something too. So the conversation around fermented foods actually brought up this great point. A patient told me about this study maybe a month ago, and it's hot off the press. It was July 2021. So there's an article on the Stanford website titled, "A Fermented Food Diet Increases Microbiome Diversity and Lowers Inflammation, Study Finds." And it was a human study, and they had people eat either a diet that was high in fermented food or high in fiber. And very interestingly enough, they did 36 healthy volunteers randomly assigned to a 10-week diet that included either fermented foods or high fiber foods. And then they assessed different markers for the immune system and the microbiome. And they said that the fermented food group actually had a better improvement in microbial diversity than the fiber-rich diet, which was fascinating. Now, here's the thing. When they said that these people had a fiber-rich diet, were they getting diversity?
Right.
Or were these people getting all their fiber from like 3 vegetables and calling it good? Right? Because
yeah.
Because you could eat 15 servings of Brussels sprouts and get a ton of fiber, but you're not getting the diversity of the fibers. So that's my only kind of critique, is I don't know if they disclosed that. But they showed also that the people who did the fermented foods also had a pretty profound decrease in inflammatory signaling molecules, I think like IL-6 and C-reactive protein, if I remember correctly. So it's pretty neat stuff. So it definitely, we're starting to have better evidence that fermented foods and prebiotics both can increase microbial diversity and can decrease inflammation and help with body-wide levels of inflammation. So I think that it's a really great tool to have in the mix. But again, is it best to rely on one source of prebiotics, or should you take, fermented food and a probiotic? Like, it depends on the person. Like, again, for me, with my level of antibiotic history, I have the fermented beets in my fridge, and I eat those a couple days a week when I remember with my lunch. I also take a probiotic supplement, and I also try to sneak in like inulin and PHGG and different sorts of prebiotics and a lot of variety in fruits and vegetables in my diet. So I'm trying to do all of the above, just because I know from my medical history, diversity is probably something that's taken a big hit over the years.
Yeah. Well, and another point I'll make about ferments too, and I think you're right, not everyone's going to tolerate ferments. And so you need to weigh in where you're at currently in your journey and what your root causal factors are and the dysfunction to whether it makes sense. But if you feel like you're at a point where you do want to try to add some ferments in, or you want to explore them a little bit, I would say the one thing I would consider is going slow. So going slow with some of this stuff, starting with just a small amount and seeing how you do. And that's with a lot of things. I think we all are prone to be like, oh, I'm adding this new food in, and I'm going to eat like a whole potato when I haven't had a potato in 2 years. And then it's like, wow, that didn't feel good. So if you've been steering clear of ferments for a while and you're trying to add them back in, I would just go slow, like as a reminder, and work your way up. There's no rush. with some of this stuff.
Yeah. And I see that a lot with people who have SIBO and IBS who have been on restricted diets. And again, they're trying to find something that is healthy for them and can heal. And I think a lot of people, more and more in recent years, really want to heal holistically and do things with food as much as possible. But yeah, it depends on the person. Some people, it's going to be more appropriate to do, a probiotic capsule or like a commercial product where you can isolate variables and the dose. The other thing too is the dose. Right. You don't know how many colony forming units are in yogurt or a fermented food. Right. And that might be okay. But if you're trying to start really slowly, you don't really know how much you're getting versus a capsule or, a probiotic supplement. It's going to tell you the exact number of colony forming units per drop or capsule or teaspoon or whatever the serving is. So you can also really play with the dose more precisely as well. But let's, if I may, let's open up the can of worms that is the SIBO probiotic can of worms, shall we?
Sure.
And I'm going to start. Can I go on a slight rant and throw just a little bit of shade for just a quick minute, and then I'll turn over to you? Okay, thank you. All right, buckle up, people. So here's the thing. We're going to talk about why probiotics are probably a reasonable thing for people with SIBO to take, despite all of the internet fear. I get the fear. Like, I get the apprehension because a lot of people feel like crap when they take probiotics. And if they've been diagnosed with SIBO or if they suspect SIBO, I think the assumption, which makes sense, is I have bacterial overgrowth. I have an increased quantity of bacteria. Why would I add more bacteria if my problem is that I have too many bacteria, right? Like piling rubbish on top of rubbish.
Yeah, you're fueling the fire.
Yeah. But remember, in previous conversations, we've talked about how SIBO is really more of a disorder of dysbiosis and poor motility. And the overgrowth itself, the quantity does not really correlate strongly with symptom presentation. So if you want to treat dysbiosis, probiotics are one of the best things that you could do to treat a dysbiotic condition. And, one of the things that I've kind of scratched my head at this argument for a little while. I've read a lot of studies, and I kind of keep up with this as much as I can. I've read studies where they do aspirates and they literally suck out the juice from the small bowel of people with SIBO. And there's been more and more studies recently, particularly Dr. Pimentel's group, where they're trying to identify and isolate the culprit, right? Like, is it all of the bacteria that are increased in their quantity, or is it just a couple of them? And it looks like in more recent research, it looks like there's a few primary contenders. Not a single study. I kid you not, Amy. And I have a folder on my computer. I have like 10 or 12 studies that I've saved. Not a single study in all the studies I've looked at have ever documented that the overgrowth is lactobacilli or bifidobacterium or Akkermansia or Faecalibacterium. Yeah. Virtually all of them are suggesting that it's E. coli, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, or maybe one of the enterococci.
Right.
And maybe staph and strep to some degree, but the two biggies are Klebsiella and E. coli.
Right.
Lactobacilli do not make that list unless you have short bowel syndrome.
Right.
Which, that's a whole other topic, the D-lactic acidosis thing. They don't make the list, and bifidobacterium have never once been implicated as the bacteria that overgrow, quote unquote, in SIBO. So why are we so fearful of probiotics when 99% of them are lactobacilli and bifidobacterium? And this is my moment to throw shade yet again. So if you just do a Google search, because that's how we get our information, right? If you do a Google search, SIBO probiotics, one of the top contenders on the first page of Google, and honestly, it used to rank higher and it's starting to fall out of favor, thank God. But if you scroll down a couple of results, you're going to come across an article from Amy Myers titled, "Why Soil-Based Probiotics Are the Best for SIBO." And she goes on talking about how, again, like you have an overgrowth, you can't be adding bacteria. Right. And hold on, I'm going to quote her. I'm going to quote because this is not true. It's simply not true. Let's see. Hold on. I should have prepped this first.
No, you're good.
Moment of boredom here. All right, let's see. All right, she's talking about SIBO. Darn it. Somewhere in this article, I'm going to try to find it. Okay, here we go. This is 100% false. Amy Myers, if you're listening right now, I'm calling you out on your bullshit. Email us at whatever the devil our email address is. I don't even know anymore.
Right.
And I quote, when bacteria are present in the small intestines, that was in italics, when bacteria are present in the small intestine, they are often lactobacillus or bifidobacterium species. The majority of probiotic supplements contain lactobacillus or bifidobacterium, so using this type of probiotic increases the bacteria in your small intestine and adds fuel to the fire. For this reason, I believe soil-based probiotics are the best probiotic for SIBO. False! False.
Oh my gosh.
1,000% false. As somebody who nerds out and reads aspirate studies all the damn time,
right,
in normal controls and SIBO, that is false. Actually, a lot of the ecosystem in the small intestine ends up being similar. The big contenders still end up being Bacteroidetes, Proteobacteria, and other Fecalibacterium species, not necessarily these two. Why the heck would she write this other than she really wants you to buy her soil-based probiotic?
Right.
Because really, a lot of these websites, particularly hers, are trying to get you to buy their stuff.
Well, and I will say, like, it's something to be so careful of because there's all these common myths that, you know, if enough people are talking about them, become truths in some way.
Yeah, must be true.
Unfortunately, I mean, we've talked about, I know, like, you know, different SIBO diets and things like that. You know, there hasn't been, that I know of, any randomly controlled trials with certain SIBO diets and showing efficacy. And maybe, again, there's symptom efficacy, but not, like, clearing the SIBO, which it's often promoted. Same thing with, like, antifungal diets that are super, 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 super low carb. Like, there's not tons of evidence to support that either. Like, there's all these common beliefs that I feel like haven't been totally fleshed out. And sometimes people double down on an idea that maybe hasn't been fleshed out and talk about it as fact, when it hasn't been proven to be true. Because even if that's an older article too, like, she might have
2018.
Yeah.
Not all that old. That's what kills me.
Yeah.
And like, as an example, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
But like, all right, here's a 2015 article. This is now bordering on oldie but goodie. And it looks like it comes from Dr. Pimentel's group, because his name is on the paper. As one example, even in 2015, they looked at the small bowel microbiome in an aspirate study in patients with IBS. And in the healthy control group, 43% of the bacteria were unclassified.
Yeah.
So we don't know everything about the microbiome, guys.
We don't.
Almost 50% of the small bowel microbiome in the study was unclassified.
Well,
versus
God.
2.17% were Escherichia E. coli or Shigella. In the IBS group, 40.11% Escherichia and Shigella. 2% versus 40% difference between IBS and the controls. If you look down at Actinobacter, you know, the one that Bifido's in. I can't compute that today. I don't know why. Yes. If you look at that one, whatever that genus is, 4.45% in the healthy controls. And like, it barely shows up. It shows up. It's lower. It is lower in the IBS group. The last one they document, so they give you Escherichia Shigella, unclassified, Aeromonas, that's another one, Lactococcus, Fusobacterium, and then all the other little pieces of the pie chart are way, 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 way smaller.
Right.
So in this particular study, the phylum that contains Bifidobacteria was actually a lot lower in the IBS group compared to controls. And then if you look, let's see, I'm not even seeing lactobacilli on here. But one of the big takeaways is that the diversity is totally different. On the one side, the healthy controls, yeah, like 43% is unclassified, but all the rest of the pie chart is this beautiful rainbow of like 6%, 9%, 1%, 4%, 3%, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. Like, it's all of these little slivers of many different types of bacteria on the pie chart in the IBS group. 40% Escherichia shigella, 26% unclassified, 22% Eremonas. And that only leaves, I don't even know, quick math, I don't even know. That leaves less than 10% of the ecosystem for everybody else crammed in that little sliver on the pie chart. So the diversity is way different. And you see things like Eremonas and Escherichia shigella making up way more of the pie chart. And everybody else is getting squashed down to nothing. But again, like specifically, if you want to pick on Bifidobacterium, this particular study, it was lower.
Right.
So what the hell, man? Like, why are you putting out non-truths into the internet? It just leads me to believe that that was written by somebody who actually either did not read the research and didn't know what they were talking about, or somebody who really wanted to sell their damn probiotics, or a combination of both.
And I would say, too, like, even the statement of when there are bacteria in the small intestines, there's bacteria in the small intestines. It's a lot less than, because there was that whole idea, and I haven't heard it as much lately, of, oh, the small intestine's supposed to be sterile. That's another kind of myth. But
nothing is sterile. Nothing.
Right.
The bladder. We used to think the bladder was sterile. It's not. We used to think the stomach was sterile up until we discovered H. pylori in the 1980s. Nothing's sterile.
Right. Bacteria everywhere. I will say, too, like, it's so interesting, and we can dive off into this, too, but, you know, the recent study showing FMT being helpful for SIBO, and that was even an oral FMT, not even, like, up the butt. It was down the hatch. It was down the hatch, FMT.
So it's got to go through the small intestines.
Right. So it has to go through the small intestines, and they found that was really helpful for SIBO, which is much more in line with the model that there's dysbiosis and probiotics are helpful. I mean, that's the best probiotic you could do is really FMT, like we were saying, the straight up poop. Straight up poop.
When we are old ladies, I mean, I hope it doesn't take that long, but you mark my words, these IBS Freedom podcast episodes are going to be a monument to how we were the first to really get it right, not to sound completely egotistical, but like, yes, it makes so much sense if you view dysbiosis, or if you view SIBO from the lens of dysbiosis and poor motility.
Yeah.
If that's what you lead with, then a lot of these articles make a hell of a lot of sense. If you lead with the, oh, it's an overgrowth, it's an infection, you have to kill it and starve it, then you see outliers like this, like the oral FMT study, where you're like, well, how does that work? They have too many bacteria and you add bacteria. How the hell does that work? Well, because the quantity is not the primary issue. We misnamed it. It should, what did I say it should be called? SIMD? Small intestinal microbial dysbiosis, SIMD, SIMD. We're going to coin it. It's not very catchy, but God damn it, we're going to coin that, and it's going to be here memorialized in the IBS Freedom Podcast in 2021. Mark my words.
Well, and I think too, like, maybe when the state of the world changed, it'd be so funny for us to go get FMT together or something like that. How funny would that be? Like, write it off as a business expense.
And
go get FMT.
We could do podcasts, and I could make YouTube videos. It was 100% a business expense. Absolutely.
Right. That's the dream.
Hashtag
us going on an FMT vacation.
Well, I've said this for a while, and we've talked about this off camera. When the world goes back to normal, like legit normal, when we don't have to worry about the Rona at all, I want to do gut health retreats with you. I think that would be the most fun thing. And we like find a place that does retreats and have people join us for a week, and we cook them healthy food and we teach them how to cook and do breathing exercises and talk about healing and oh my God, that would be so amazing. But I'm not willing to do that until the world feels more normal and more safe, because we're still not out of the woods on this whole COVID thing yet.
I think even putting in the energy to plan it, and then like things can go south, and then I can't imagine my friends that have planned weddings and stuff during like this time where it's like, oh, we just put in like a year's worth of work and our wedding's canceled. Right. So yeah, I think that sounds awesome. I would love to do something like that with you.
Yep. Just maybe not quite yet.
Right.
Things can change in a weird short amount of time. But going back to the conversation at hand, though, SIBO and probiotics, I will say, there's a study. If you think that we're all full of baloney and you want some actual documented evidence, I will say that you can very easily type in SIBO probiotics on PubMed. By far, the vast majority of the studies are very positive. There was one, I forget what it was. I think it might have been the strain of bacteria in Dannon yogurt. It was only a 2-week study, which is hardly enough to get useful information out of. But I think that one was not helpful, or it was either equivocal or no change, or it might have made them a little bit worse. But otherwise, virtually every study I've seen on this topic has been very favorable for the probiotics. And there was a meta-analysis done in 2017 titled Probiotics for Preventing and Treating Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, a meta-analysis and systematic review of current evidence. And it was very favorable. They said across the board, therefore, the present findings indicate that probiotic supplementation could effectively decontaminate SIBO. There we go again with like, you gotta sterilize the small bowel, but it is what it is. Could effectively decontaminate SIBO, decrease hydrogen concentration, and relieve abdominal pain. But this study said they were ineffective in preventing SIBO. The other study that I was hoping to pop up, and I wasn't able to find it in like the nanosecond that I gave myself. There was a study that I saw, I think it might have been with kids. I think I included this in a YouTube video when I did my YouTube video about SIBO and probiotics. But I think it was children who were put on a PPI, and they were assessed for SIBO after they had been on a PPI for some amount of time. And the group that received the PPI plus the probiotic, hardly any of them got SIBO. Like a very small portion of them got SIBO. The kids who only got the PPI with no probiotics, I forget what the numbers were, like 30%, 40% of them got SIBO, something like that. Right. And then the kids who, the control group remained unchanged. But there was at least that study looking at preventing SIBO using probiotics, and it was very favorable in children on PPIs. So I think it could even be used for the prevention of SIBO, honestly.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yep. So for what it's worth, there's definitely evidence that supports the use of probiotics with SIBO. Clinically, what I would say is that, I don't know about you, maybe you have a different take on it, but I generally don't run out of the gate with probiotics for SIBO. Not because they won't be helpful, but because I just try to be respectful of the PTSD that people have when they hear the word probiotics. Right. So for me, clinically, like I give us a little bit more time to kind of establish some rapport, make some forward momentum, and get them feeling at least a little bit better. And then after working with my patients for usually at least a month or maybe a bit more, then we might have the conversation about probiotics. But I tend to leave it a little bit like for the middle or the back half of a treatment plan, just because I know that a lot of people with SIBO hear the word probiotic and they go, oh, never, and they freak out. So I kind of work it in that way. And then similarly, in my course, I was joking with people this week, like in FODMAP Freedom, I wait until the dead end of the course, week 12, to teach them about probiotics and prebiotics. Not because they're not helpful, but because I know that a lot of people going through that curriculum are going to have that kind of like PTSD when they hear the word probiotic. And I want to focus on other things like motility and the gut-brain axis and making sure that they have made some progress and reintroduce some foods first. And then the probiotics, it's almost like a fine-tuning measure by the time we get to that part of the course. But I don't know, do you have a similar kind of take on it, or do you roll right into probiotics, or does it depend on the person?
I think it probably depends on the person a little bit. Like if someone's already on a probiotic or something, we might mess around a little bit with trying a couple others. But I will say too, I think you're better off getting your bases covered first than trying to manipulate the microbiome. Like if you're not, like that's sort of how my course is set up as well. Like I think week 6 of 9 is when we talk about microbial balancing with probiotics. But yeah, I mean, I'm sort of the same way. Like I'd rather focus on like digestive insufficiencies, motility issues, making sure you're nourishing your body properly, making sure your lifestyle's in check, like doing some of these preliminary stuff that if those things don't get covered, it's impossible to make progress. Like you're not going to get the most bang for your buck if you just throw a bunch of probiotics at a dysfunctional gut. You're going to get much better progress and more out of the probiotics if you cover your bases earlier by hitting on nutrition, lifestyle, brain gut stuff. That first. I'm in total agreement with that.
Well, it's kind of like what you said. The very first words I think you said on this episode of the podcast was that probiotics are great, but kind of like don't put your eggs in one basket. Right. Don't expect probiotics to carry the weight of the world and the weight of all of your gut dysfunction and be like a magic cure-all, because that's usually not how it works. I think healing on some level is kind of like this weird pie chart that we're trying to wrap our heads around. And it's like, all right, maybe leaky gut is like 20% of the problem, quote unquote, for me. And maybe leaky gut is like 40% of the problem for you. And, digestive enzyme insufficiency, maybe that's like 50% of the problem for me, but it's only like 5% of the problem for you. And I think if we can try to establish what the pie chart looks like in the beginning of the healing journey, then you know what you need to tackle when a little bit more clearly. Like if something is making up 40 or 50% of your pie chart, well, damn tootin', you go after that first. That's the biggest piece of the pie. And then you worry about the fine tuning. You worry about the little stuff later. But you have to get a sense of what that pie chart looks like. Otherwise, you're going to be wandering around just looking for the magic probiotic or the magic antimicrobial, and that's usually not something that is going to exist.
Right. And I like your pie chart analogy, and I think you could use it for interventions as well. So, like, if you know sort of what your root causes are from a pie chart standpoint, and then you have another pie chart that's the interventions you're doing. So I will say most of the time what I'm seeing people doing is like, 75% of time and energy on restricting their diet and maybe 25% on like researching and getting supplements correct, or like, organizing their supplements. So they have like so much of their focus on these two areas that, restricting can have some value short term, but is not a good long term strategy. Everyone's heard us say this a million times. But when you're investing all your eggs in like two baskets, I think in the same vein of when you're trying to get other interventions in the mix, you can't do that unless you free up energy that you're putting into the diet restrictions to invest somewhere else. So maybe your interventions are like you spend 10% of your time and energy on taking your supplements. Then you spend, 20 to 25% of energy on nutrition, and then 15% on lifestyle. And some people might be different, like what you're saying. There's like, some people don't have to invest that much in nutrition because they sort of already have had that squared away for a little bit. Maybe they really need to do stress management. So like probiotics is a part of that pie chart from an intervention standpoint, and don't expect it to be like the big thing, the big kahuna that's gonna come in and
the thing, the answer. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's, humans, I think intrinsically are so naive and optimistic. It makes sense. Like we all want the magic bullet. Don't get me wrong. Like we are not immune to this.
Right.
I am human too. When I have something going on, like when my sleep was crappy, I didn't want to do like breathing exercises and yoga and shit. I wanted to take like CBD oil and magically sleep well.
Right.
And yeah, like CBD is helpful and it does promote deep sleep for me at least. But it's also like, I know damn well that it's stress management and lifestyle stuff during the day that's going to actually lead to better sleep for me. So I wanted to say, like, we're not immune. Right. It's not like we're totally making fun of all of you.
Right.
But it's, magic bullets almost never exist.
Right.
And they're really tempting and shiny, but the tempting, shiny stuff almost always is going to be disappointing on some level. I think, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Kind of, again, view your healing journey and view your treatment plan as this pie chart, and you want it to have some diversity and redundancy and a little buffet of sorts of treatments.
Yeah.
So that it's not just like, oh, the buffet is steak and mashed potatoes again. Whoop-de-doo. I'm tired of this. The buffet turns into like, oh, maybe I'll have a little bit of Brussels sprouts. Maybe I'll have a little bit of carrots. Maybe I'll have a little bit of pie. Like, you want that diversity in your treatment plan. And now I just left us with another metaphor of the buffet of treatment opportunities.
Right. Well, and I think, I do want to touch a little bit on this too, because like some people, both in the IBS and SIBO space, might react poorly to a probiotic, and what does that actually mean for them? Because I think sometimes, the default in the SIBO space is like, oh my gosh, I'm feeding the SIBO. I've heard
piling
that.
Bacteria on top of bacteria.
Right. If I had $1 for every person that's told me that, like, I took this probiotic, it fed the SIBO. So we know it's there's no research showing that it's feeding anything. So we know that. So what's happening? I have some thoughts. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I definitely have an opinion on this. I'll actually kick it to you first because I'm going to cite my own. I have a YouTube video on this specifically, but I'm going to pull up the title of it because I forget what the actual title is for people to go reference. Yeah,
I think that there can sometimes be, it depends sort of what the symptoms are. If they're having kind of systemic type symptoms that feel like a little flu-like, I think a lot of times, or just like they'd feel off, like they just generally don't feel very well on the probiotic. I do think that could be an immune type reaction to where the immune system's sort of in overdrive with these new probiotics in the mix. I think that could be,
perhaps.
What do you say?
Honky-tonky, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes. I think, again, like, there can be a percentage of people that might have a little bit of die-off from probiotics. I don't think it's everybody. But I do think that there's a percentage of people that have a little die-off. Some people are going to have adjustments to probiotics depending on the symptom. Like, if you're having a little bit more gas or, like, just a little bit of change, that might be to be expected as long as you don't feel bad. But if you notice like some change, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes whenever we try something new and we kind of have like a neutral / like changiness to it. Changiness is not a word, but like you have more of a neutral change. It's not really irritating you or anything, but you notice like differences
Yeah,
happening.
it's just different.
Right. I think sometimes people think a different thing is a bad thing. And so again, things like that might be okay. So that's generally what I would think if someone's having a reaction. I wouldn't think, again, like you're feeding anything.
Yeah.
It could be immune system based. It could be die off. I mean, there could just be some slight changes going on. It just kind of depends on the person and analyzing what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a good executive summary. And this was something like I talked about. So the video is actually just titled Probiotic Side Effects. I didn't know if it had a more complicated name, but it's on my Triangle Holistic Gut Health channel. But basically, I agree. I think that probably what's happening 9 times out of 10 is that you are changing the immune system somehow.
Right.
And, you know, there's a million different parts of the immune system, a million different types of cells. And here's something too. We don't know everything about the microbiome. Again, like roughly half of it is unnamed, uncategorized. Right. We don't know diddly squat about 50% of the microbiome. Similarly, the immune system is still very mysterious to us. We know a lot about it, but we actually don't know everything. We are still discovering new immune cells. Like there was a T helper cell discovered in like 2011 or something. Like, what? Like, how do we not know that was there? But I think that we certainly don't know everything about the microbiome. We definitely don't know everything about all the probiotic strains and all the different species and all the different doses and formulations and diseases and symptoms. And we don't know everything about the immune system. So it is a bit of a wild card in a sense, because you're dropping something into your body that we know damn well interacts with your immune system, and it changes the behavior of the immune system in some way, shape, or form. But we don't have crystal clear clarity on how it does that and why and how all that works. So I think for most people, it is changing the immune system and its behavior in some way. It could be for the better. It could be for the worst. I mean, you know, and it could be that it is increasing the population of one type of cell, like a T cell or a dendritic cell. It could be that it's stimulating the cells and it's making them more active. It could be that it's dampening or inhibiting a type of immune cell and it's bringing their numbers down, or it's making their systems less effective or less efficient. We don't know. So I think a lot of it is immunomodulation, and that we just can't really wrap our head around what that looks like. Not consistently. And it depends on the person.
Right.
So like if you have an immune system that is imbalanced towards more histamine and more mast cell disorders and more like Th2 polarization, then taking a probiotic that polarizes you more towards Th1 could be great, because that's going to inhibit Th2 and it's going to balance out the seesaw. If, on the other hand, you have a Th1 mediated condition, which, side note, is pretty rare, but nonetheless, if you have a condition where Th1 is already overly active, and then you take a probiotic that stimulates that side of the immune system even more, well, then that's going to probably make you feel crappy. But theoretically, your neighbor Susie, who has the same diagnosis or the same symptom you do, but has a totally different immune system, you might have completely different effects from the exact same probiotic.
Right.
We don't know. And this is part of why, too, I think I've shared this with you. What I personally do, on some level, I've said, screw it. I don't know anymore. I know probiotics are great, but I'll be damned if I can figure out which one does what for what person. And I just got sick of selling people probiotics that then they turned around and they hated, and they were like writing me angry emails. So for me, what I do 80% of the time, unless I have a really good reason for prescribing one specific probiotic.
Right.
So like BioGaia or Mutaflor or Lactobacillus plantarum 299V. Like, aside from a couple of very specific situations, I almost always have my patients speed date different probiotics.
Yeah.
And I have them just try like 2 capsules, 1 capsule per day, 2 days in a row, keep a diary, and then move on to the next one, and do that over the course of several weeks or a month or two. And then they report back and they tell me which ones they loved, which ones they hated, and which ones they felt neutral about. And usually that gives us at least some glimmer of understanding of which ones might be promising for them to try for the duration of a month or two, and see how far that gets us.
Right.
But it was kind of my effort, kind of like the ProKinetics. I do the same thing, but I do it for 1 week at a time instead of 2 days. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I have an inventory. I'll just crack open the bottles and I'll put them in little baggies and I'll send you home with the speed dating process. Yeah. And I would rather do that than try to say that I know which one is going to be your favorite. I don't know.
Right. No, it's such a cool idea. I would love to see what probiotics you have on the rotation too. Maybe I should do your speed dating.
I'll send you some for speed dating.
Whoa.
Fun.
And I like how it's called speed dating too.
I know.
It's like that too. It's like very, very sexy of you, Nikki.
I know. You know how I do.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So let's see. All right. My lineup. Now this is a kind of hodgepodge list. And it's a combination of strains that have like good quality human data, or products that have a good reputation for whatever reason. So my hodgepodge list is, let's see, orthomolecular, orthobiotic 100. If I remember correctly, I don't think they disclose their strains, but they do have some good products, so I give them a whirl.
Yeah.
Microbiome Labs, HU58, Jarro's Mood Probiotic, Zymogen Probiomax Daily DF, Jarro's Ideal Bowel Support, Jarro EPS, BioGaia, Biocult, Allergy Research Group Lactobacillus Probiotic, Metabolic Maintenance, Biomaintenance Shelf Stable. That one, none of them, I know what the strains are, none of them have good quality human data, but for whatever reason, some people really like that one, so I'm just running with it. I don't know why. Megaspore Probiotic, Claire Factor 6. Claire is a company that does not disclose their strains, and they get a lot of shit for it, but they have a really good reputation. And for whatever reason, I had other ones in the rotation, and I ended up pulling them out. The one that really has come through as a fan favorite has been Factor 6.
Right.
I remember you
talking about that one in is that the histamine one that you like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not all of my histamine people like it, but a fair margin of people with histamine problems end up liking that one. Let's see, where did I leave off? A couple from Metagenics. I've got their Ultraflora Restore, Ultraflora Immune Booster, and Ultraflora IB. Protocol for Life Balance, Bifido Digest. Master supplements, I have 2 of theirs, Theralac Professional and True Bifido. Standard Process Pro Symbiotic. I might drop that one out, honestly, because I haven't had a lot of people choose that. But they have some good-looking strains in there, and I wanted to give them a shot. And then Pure Encapsulations Probiotic 50B. And that's the current lineup. There's 20. There's 20. Because I can't control myself. And, it's like I'll read something, or I'll come across something, or somebody will tell me something about a probiotic that they really liked, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to add it to the list. And I did that until I got up to 20, and then I was like, no, I need to, I like cut myself off at that amount, because at some point it becomes ridiculous. But yeah, that's the current lineup, and really the only one that consistently I have any semblance of understanding is that a fair number of my histamine intolerant patients really like Factor 6. Otherwise, total crapshoot.
Right.
I had somebody recently really like the Zymogen product. I had somebody recently really like Megaspore. I had somebody recently who hated Megaspore.
Right.
And I had them do the appropriate dosing. I ramped them up very slowly. Yeah, and then I have a few others that I'll use on occasion, but I don't usually keep them in the rotation because they're kind of unique. Like Mutaflora, I don't have that one in the rotation right now.
Right.
So yeah, but that's the current lineup as it stands right now. Very rarely I'll use Culturelle. Very rarely I'll use Mutaflora. Yeah, I think otherwise I probably told you most of the favorites right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think again, like, that's such a cool idea. It'd be interesting to try to do that with some of my probiotics. I haven't done that quite yet, but it's a really cool idea that I might have to steal from you.
Yeah, feel free. Yep. And then I just tell people, go through it slowly, keep a little diary. It is what you make it, but most people end up really liking at least one or two or three of those products.
Right.
And then, it's great because it takes the pressure off me in a way of like, all right, well, I don't have to pretend to know it all. I don't have to put that pressure on me, right? Like, okay, well, you tell me which ones you like. And then if they report back, like I had a patient with, I forget if it was hypothesized SIBO or confirmed SIBO. She definitely had IBS and she definitely had a lot of histamine issues. She called herself a hyperallergic person when we first met.
Right.
So that definitely got us off on that foot towards histamine stuff. But, for her, she had quite a lot of neuropathy. And like one or two of the probiotics greatly helped reduce the neuropathy, even in the span of 2 days. It's like, wow. All right, well, let's see what a month on it does. Or let's see if you want to stay on that for the long haul.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been a good way to go about it. Again, it's like the most scientific and the least scientific way to go about it in a weird way. But it kind of takes the pressure off me and it lets people really tune into their body and try to learn what ones their body actually likes, which is nice.
Right. Cool. No, I love that idea.
Yeah, well, I feel like that's a pretty good conversation around probiotics thus far. I don't think I have anything else in particular to add to the conversation at the moment. I don't know if you do.
I agree, and I do need to use the restroom. I need to go
Fair enough.
pee. We both have our bladders.
I know. Yeah,
we both have our bladders.
We both have bladders, and we oftentimes we are pee buddies, and we'll go take a pee break on a break if we're doing a doubleheader episode. So, guys, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this offered clarity and understanding, and maybe a glimmer of hope that probiotics are something that you can incorporate into your gut healing strategy. As per our usual, if you found this episode helpful or insightful or just fun to listen to, we would deeply appreciate sharing it wherever you feel appropriate, on your newsfeed, in your Facebook groups, wherever it might be. Share to your little heart's content. We would really appreciate getting the word out there. And as always, if you can leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or podcasting apps, or if you can click subscribe and leave a comment on the YouTube video, we would deeply appreciate that. And speaking of which, we haven't done a Q&A episode in a while, so we might need to do that sometime in the near future. But until next time, adios. We will see you on the next episode of the IBS Treatment Podcast.